All right, chapter 27 of Shepherd's Quest, book 1, Broken Key Trilogy. A quick recap before I read through it with commentary. Well, they found a second segment of the key. They went through hell to get to it, almost drowned, and now they've slogged out of the river trap, and they're warming themselves up by the fire. And then now they're going to decide how to get out of there. Kind of a fun adventure. I think we've got 2 more chapters after this one, and then we're done. So here it is, chapter 27. Riyan was quick to get the fire they left banked on the landing restored to life. The others came from the steps and embraced its warmth. Chad wasn't doing too good. There was pain coming from his back. When the door struck him, it had injured him in some way, maybe even broken something. He was fortunate that the blow hadn't left him paralyzed. After Kevik and Bart assisted him to the fire, Bart dug one of the potions they had found earlier out of his pack and gave it to him. That's one of the ones they found in the chest there in the ruins, and Kevik's spell had said it was a healing potion. So hopefully it will still work, right? Because it's been sitting there for probably 1,000 years. Here, he said as he handed it to him. Chad could barely reach out to take it as the movement of his muscles aggravated his injury and flared the already unbearable pain to such an extent that dots formed before his eyes. Kevik had to help him open the bottle before he could drink it. Then he put it to his lips and drank it down. As soon as the elixir within the bottle passed through his throat, the pain began to subside. Bart watched as the pain in his eyes eased, along with the stiffness in the rest of his body. Man, that feels better, Chat said after a few minutes. In the area of his back where the pain had flared the worst, he felt a warming sensation that continued to intensify until just before becoming uncomfortable. Not an unpleasant sensation, it was more a reassuring one as Chad knew the injury was being repaired by the potion. I was worried about you there for a while, admitted Riyan. Worried about you. Chad gave him a grin. So was I. Then they saw the glitter of gold as Bart removed the 2 segments of the key and showed them to the others. He went on to tell them what he had discovered down below, how he had opened the door, and finally the finding of the second segment. So does this mean that there are 2 more somewhere? Asked Kevik. It looks that way, he replied. Then he glanced to Riyan. It may take some time before we can discover where to find the other 2. Riyan nodded. I figured that as soon as I saw the second segment. Bart held the 2 pieces close together and then turned them so the map on the back was visible. They go together, he told the others. Indeed, the edges of the map, of the original segment aligned perfectly to the edge of the second. If we were to put them together, there would be one continuous map. Are there any indications of where the other segment may be? Chad asked. Since markings on the first one had led them to the ruins of Algoth, where the second segment was located, he hoped there would be something similar on the second segment that would lead them to a third. Bart brought the second segment closer to the firelight and examined it, but couldn't make out any such markings. He finally looked up at the others and shook his head. No, nothing. Too bad, Chad said. The fire crackled in the silence as the 4 comrades sat on the ledge next to the flowing river. Bart fiddled with the 2 segments and brought them together so the edges touched. He thought that maybe they would fuse together or something. To his disappointment, nothing happened when they touched. Shrugging, he handed the 2 segments to Chad so he and the others could examine them. Then he stood up and stretched. So, I don't know if you guys have put this together or not, but in the crypt, that original place that they explored in the beginning, they found that one room. There was the king, right, and the other 3 guys. And one of those guys had the dragon sword coat of arms, which is where Algoth is the bastion of that lord that had the dragon sword coat of arms. And another segment was there. So there's the king and like his 3 lieutenants or 3, biggest supporters, whatever. and there are 4 segments. So the king, one was found in the crypt. Then one was found in Algoth, which was associated with the lord that has the dragon sword. So it should be safe to assume that the other 2, each one will be found with one of the other 2 lords, right? Frankly, I can't remember when they put that together, but they have to, right? Because that's the way it's meant to be. So basically, they created a key, and then the king broke it into 4 segments. And he retained one, and he gave one to each of his lieutenants and said, hide it somewhere. You don't need to tell me, just hide it somewhere. And that way, no one could put it back together. Did I tell you guys why? Because that was going to be the basis of the next one. I think I went into that details at some point. Anyway, I'm not going to do it here. I got reading to do it, and I'm meandering again. Riyan glanced at him and saw Bart begin moving to the passage leading back to the flooded stairwell and tunnels. Where are you going? Bart paused and said, I want to see if I can find that door. What do you want that for? Anyway, Kevik asked, turning his gaze toward him. Bart said, it would give us something to hold on to when we went down the river. Kevik nodded understandingly. Do you want some help, he asked. Your light would be helpful, he replied. All right, Kevik said, then got to his feet and joined him. His bobbing sphere appeared, and together they walked into the passage. When they reached the top of the stairs, a light from the sphere revealed that the water flooding the lower area came to within 10 feet of the top of the stairs. The door was nowhere in sight. I was hoping I wouldn't come to this, Bart sighed as he shed his pack. He set it down against the wall and then coiled his rope. What do you plan to do? Kevik asked. With the rope now uncoiled, Bart tied it around his waist as he turned back to Kevik. I'm going after it, he explained. I would appreciate it if you could hold on to the end of the rope for me. Sure, he said, I can do that. He picked up the other end and stood ready. Once I go under, start counting, Bart told him. If you get to 200 before I return, start pulling me back. Are you sure you can hold your breath that long? Kevik asked. Bart nodded. 200 and no more. Understand? I understand. Turning back to the stairs, Bart moved down. It's amazing how many times I put began in this. Instead of Bart began moving, I'm changing it to Bart moved. Bart moved down. Okay, turning back to the stairs, Bart moved down into the water's edge. When his foot entered the water, it sent a shiver of cold through him. He tried to disregard the coldness as he settled into the water. Once he reached a place where it was up to his neck, he glanced back to Kevik and saw that he was ready. He then took several deep breaths in succession before diving under the surface. 1, 2, 3. Kevik began counting. Bart left the glow from Kevik's bobbing sphere behind as he swam down into the darkness below. He knew that the door would be pressed against the ceiling, as buoyancy would see to that. So, as he swam, he periodically ran his hand along the stone ceiling in search of the wooden door. He was pretty certain that the door would be in the room at the top of the shaft. That's where he had lost track of it. Somehow, he had to get it into the passage leading to the stairwell before his air ran out. Deeper he went into the darkness until he felt the ceiling all of a sudden rise higher, telling him that he had entered the room. From there, he began checking the room ceiling. By this time, the effort to keep from breathing was growing increasingly more difficult. He knew he didn't have much time left, so quickly searched for the door. After a few moments, his hand hit something. It was the door. The water held it pressed tightly to the ceiling. He then moved to the other side and began working it to the opening of the passage leading to the stairwell. It was hard going, but he moved it several feet before he felt a tug on the rope as Kevik began reeling him back in. He let go of the door and quickly swam back along the rope's path until his head broke through the surface. The air that had been trapped inside burst out as his lungs began drawing fresh air into them. He started coughing as droplets of water were sucked down with his first inhalation. "Did you find it?" He looked up to see Ryan and Chad standing next to Kevik. Nodding, he coughed a couple more times and said, "Yes, I did. It's in the room at the other end of the passage. Give me a minute to catch my breath and I'll try again." Then he glanced at Chad. "How's your back?" "Good as new," he replied, then did a few bends and twists to emphasize the point. "Don't overdo it," cautioned Bart. "I won't," Chad assured him. He looked tired, the magic of the potion again having used energy from his body in its healing. Bart rested a few minutes, then returned to the water. It took him another 2 attempts before he was able to bring the door out of the room and up the stairwell. When he broke the surface with the door in hand, the other three cheered. Ryan and Kevin grabbed the door and brought it out of the landing, where they set it down next to the fire. When Chad returned with Bart, Ryan asked, "What do you plan to do with it?" "Quite simple, really," he explained. "We set our packs in the center of the door, then wind the rope in and around them to create 4 loops long enough to hold each of us. 1 loop will extend over each of the 4 sides of the door, so we won't be knocked together if things get rough. Then Kevin casts his goo spell so that it will coat all the packs and bind the rope to the door." You could see that the others were beginning to understand the plan. "After that, it's fairly straightforward," he continued. "We put the door with packs and rope, already secured by the goo, into the water. Then we get into the water, place ourselves within the loops, and ride the river out of here." "What if it doesn't go anywhere?" asked Chad. Bart turned a grim smile toward him. "Then our adventure comes to an end." He glanced around at the others and said, "If anyone here has a better plan, now would be the time to mention it." When the others remained silent, he nodded. "Very well then. Shall we get it ready?" Now the river's got to go somewhere, right? I mean, it's flowing. Rivers don't just flow and then stop. Not, and they'll keep backing up and filling up, so it goes somewhere. I'm surprised he even asked that. They took their 4 packs and placed them in the center of the door, just as Bart had said. They weren't willing to risk the 2 segments of the key by keeping them in the packs, so Bart and Ryan each put one of the segments in their belt pouches for safekeeping. Once the packs were in position on the door, Bart took his rope and looped it around so it crisscrossed through the packs several times. When he was done, a loop extended past the edge of the door on all 4 sides. Then he said to Kevik, "Your turn." Kevik nodded. Kevik cast his goo spell. I'm really tired. Man, storms last night, lightning, thunder all night long, hours. I'm really tired. The green globule appeared on top of the packs and quickly oozed its way down to the door beneath. When its movement finally stopped, Bart had each of them grip a different loop. Then with all of them straining hard, they pulled and jerked their loops. Bart grinned to himself when, after all they tried to do, not one loop came undone from the goo coating. "So, we have about an hour?" he asked Kevik about the goo. "Something like that," he replied. "I've never actually timed it, but that's what I was told by my master." Bart nodded. "Good enough for me. If after an hour we're still in the water, we'll try to find some place to land and redo it." Taking his loop in hand, he and the others lifted the makeshift door raft and carried it to the water's edge. "Well, actually, I'm not going to change it, but if the time limit's an hour, then you don't wait until after an hour to redo it, because if you wait till after an hour to redo it, then it's gonna come undone and everything's gonna fall apart before you do it. My mind just never stops. Sometimes it's really annoying me. All right, let me go in first, suggested Ryan. That way I can steady it while the rest of you take your position. Ryan let go of his loop and quickly slipped over the side of the landing. Once he was in the water and had a secure hold on the landing's edge, he indicated for them to put the raft in the water. Moving it to the edge, they slid it into the water. Ryan immediately ducked under the surface and came up within the loop closest to the landing. Then he gripped the landing's edge. "All right," he said. "Now the rest of you, one at a time." Bart was the first to enter the water and took his position in the loop opposite Ryan. Then he helped Ryan hold the raft against the current, while first Kevik, Then Chad took their position. Chad, being the last to enter, had to work his way around the edge of the raft before he came to the last loop. Once he was within the loop, Bart and Riyan let go. The current immediately pulled them away from the landing and quickly swept them downstream. The underground river turned to the right, and the raft drifted to the outside of the curve. Chad happened to be on that side, and when the current moved them too close to the wall, he used his feet to kick them back toward the middle. Now, I would think this would be a really cool scene in a movie, right? I think the whole ruins of Algoth would just be really nice to see on the big screen. These four guys on this door going through rapids. I just think that would be a great thing. It makes me think of The River Wild. Have you seen that movie? That was a good movie. Anyway, okay. The underground river turned to the right, and the raft drifted to the outside of the bend, of the river's bend. Chad happened to be on that side, and when the current moved them too close to the wall, he used his feet to kick them back toward the middle. Above the raft were 3 bobbing spheres. Riyan had requested Kevik to supply additional light so they could better keep an eye on what was coming ahead. They didn't have paddles or oars, so would need some warning if they should all of a sudden need to change their position on the river to avoid an obstacle. As the river finished its course, it moved along a straighter channel. Not too far past the curve, Kevik noticed another landing on the inside bank of the river. "Look there," he hollered when he saw that. "Look there," he hollered when he saw it. "It might be the way out," cried Bart. They used their arms and legs in an attempt to gain the other side of the river, but the current was too strong. Bart suggested they dismantle the raft and use the ropes and packs like they had before, meaning tie them together, swing them, goo, splat the wall, and then pull themselves over. But they were moving far too quickly away from the landing for them to have it ready in time, so they decided against it. All they could do was float in the water, secure in their loops, while the landing disappeared behind them. Now, that landing was the escape route of the Lord. Because the way I had it figured, where they were, the initial landing where they created the raft from the pier, the Lord would have had a boat stationed there during his time at Algoth. So that way, if he needed a fast escape, boom, and then he'd got in there, floated down the river, maybe stopped off and gotten the key if Algoth was going to fall, and then continued on to this other landing where he would have exited and made his escape. That was always in my thought for the second landing. Floating along as they were was fairly comfortable, actually. If they could ignore the coldness of the water, it really wasn't all that bad. They had the rope loops to keep them from sinking, while the door itself gave them buoyancy and something to hold on to. Is that one word or two? Onto. Several minutes after the landing disappeared behind them, the current of the river... Do I really need to have of the river? No. The current felt as if it was picking up speed. Then from ahead came the unmistakable sound of rapids. "This could get interesting," commented Riyan. "No matter what happens," Bart said, "don't let go of your loop." Well, actually, it's not like they're... I always pictured in my scene they have a store and there's 4 loops, right? It's not that they're holding on to it; it's that they're up inside of, and so the loop is around their chest and their arms are over, so there's no way they can let go of their loop. "Wasn't planning on it," Chad hollered. The surface of the water that had been so placid thus far began rocking them back and forth. They hung on the river's They hung on as the river's speed increased, and they saw the approach of the rapids. Their little makeshift raft was soon being tossed about as the water crashed over submerged rocks. They would be plunged down one watery furrow before a swell would raise them high, only to be slammed back down again. Once, when the waves slammed them down, they were jarred fiercely when the door landed on a rock that was protruding out of the water. "We're stuck!" hollered Kevik fearfully as they teetered there upon the tip of the rock. So the rock's here and the door's like this, and they're trying to get it off the rock. "Rock it back and forth," yelled Bart. Water kept crashing into them, but failed to dislodge their raft. They shifted their weight from one side to the next as they attempted to get their raft off the rock. Ryan and Chad were in a good position to use their feet against the sides of the rock for leverage. Then suddenly, they were free and again being tossed by the water. The raft would turn round about as the water kept thrashing them. First, Ryan's side of the raft would be facing downstream, then it would be Kevik's turn. Back and forth and round about they went, as the water continued to crash over the rocks. They each kept a look ahead as best they could to avoid dangers. "A rock," said Bart. A large rock thrust its way out of the water not too far ahead of them. The river crashed fiercely against its sides. Ryan was in perfect position to be rammed into it. He pointed to the left and yelled, "That way!" Using their feet and arms, they worked the rafts so that it only grazed the side of the rock. Ryan kicked out at it to keep his body from being crushed between it and the edge of the door. "How much more of this is there?" yelled Chad. From Bart's position, he could see ahead of them for as far as the spheres illuminated. "Still a ways," he replied. Then he saw where the river was about to go down a series of shallow falls. "Hold on," he yelled. Ryan looked over his shoulder and saw what was coming. "Oh my God," he said, then braced himself as the raft went over the first drop. It was only 5 feet, but when he hit, Ryan felt like he had fallen 100. Then the raft slammed painfully into his chest and pushed him even deeper under the water. The blow to his chest seemed to stun his lungs, for when he broke the surface, he couldn't get a breath. Then his lungs eased up, and after a few anxious moments, started drawing breaths again. "Here comes another one!" Kevik yelled as they headed for the lip of the next fall. Ryan panicked at the thought of another blow like the last one, but then realized the raft had shifted and he wouldn't be directly beneath it when it hit this time. He gripped the loop, holding him to the raft tightly as they went over the edge. This one was a 3-tiered fall, and by the time they reached the bottom, they were all bruised and battered. Kevik thought he may have broken his leg. At this point, the river calmed down and began floating normally once more. "Everyone all right?" Ryan asked. "No," replied Kevik through gritted teeth. "My leg hit a rock during those last rapids. I think it may be broken." Ryan turned to Chad and Bart. "We need to get him out of the water and look at it," he told them. They nodded and began searching for a place where they could make landfall. A few minutes later, an area came into view that looked like it would do. The walls of the channel the water flowed through widened, and a shelf of sorts appeared on their right. It was at least 6 inches higher than the surface of the water and wide enough for them to rest upon. They paddled as best they could toward it. Kevik, of course, was dead weight due to his injury. When they drew close to the shelf, they found that the river was shallower there, and they could touch the bottom. When they were next to the ledge, Bart and Ryan helped Kevik out of his loop and up onto the shelf. Chad took charge of the raft and made sure it didn't float away. Setting Kevik on the shelf, Bart placed his hands on the suspected broken leg. He moved them gently up and down as he sought the break. After several minutes, he looked at Kevik and said, "I don't think it's broken." "Are you sure?" he asked. Bart nodded. "The bone feels fine," he explained. "You probably just bruised it really bad." "That's a relief." They decided to take a break there on the shelf to give them some time out of the water before continuing. Bart and Ryan helped Chad in pulling the raft up onto the shelf. Once it was out of the water and resting on the ground, Kevik canceled his goose bill so Ryan could give him some of his healing potion. Not all of it, just enough to ease the pain. Propping themselves against the back wall of the shelf, they rested for a short time. While Ryan rested, he noticed how the shelf ran along the river past where the light from the spears extended. "Wonder if we could just walk the rest of the way." "Rest of the way to where?" asked Kevik. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe this comes out at the lake or something." Bart nodded. "Could definitely give it a try. If it doesn't, we could always come back and get the raft." "I just wish we had a regular lantern or torch," said Chad. Ryan glanced at the bobbing spheres, which which have been grating on everyone's nerves. Me too, he agreed. You know, that would be kind of annoying, right? Constantly moving light around you. But with 3 of them, the effect would be diminished, because a single one, the light source would be moving around you, which would be disorienting. But with 3 of them moving all at the same time in different directions, there wouldn't be such a disparity when they reach different spots, because the other 2 would compensate if one moved off a ways, the other one, Let's see here. After resting for a little longer to give the potion ample time to work on Kevik, they returned to their feet. They each took their packs, and Bart coiled a rope before placing it in his. Then they made their way along the shelf. The shelf continued to follow the river, and at times would grow quite narrow as to be almost non-existent. Other times it widened sufficiently so all 4 could walk abreast if they wished. They had followed the shelf for 20 minutes before it ended at a rock formation that jutted out from the wall. In order to continue, they would have to enter the river and work their way around the obstruction to the other side, which after a quick discussion, they decided to do. Riyan went first, with Chad following right behind. Bart brought up the rear as they entered the water and edged out to move around the outcrop. Riyan maintained his balance against the current by holding onto the cracks and crevices prevalent throughout the face of the outcrop. The worst part was when he began moving around the edge of the outcrop. He almost lost his footing as the current was at its strongest there. He managed to work his way around to the other side. The shelf continues on, he hauled back to the others when he could see it. Good news, he heard Bart reply. One by one, they made their way around the point of the outcrop. Riyan had remained to assist the others. It didn't take long before they were once again back on the shelf and continuing on. The underground channel was quiet, except for the occasional lapping of water against the sides. None of them felt much like talking. Exhaustion, resulting from all they'd recently gone through, had sapped their desire for conversation. And it was in this quiet that the warbling of a bird was suddenly heard. Riyan came to a stop. Did you hear that? Again, the warbling echoed down the channel. It's a bird, exclaimed Kevik. That means the way out can't be too far away, Bart said. Can you tell where it's coming from? They paused for a moment as each listened to the bird's call. It's coming from up ahead, Chad finally said. Then what are we waiting for, Kevik asked. I, for one, am anxious to get out of here, Bart sighed. So am I. With the possibility of escaping this underground world and returning to the outside, they hurried forward with renewed energy. Shortly, they began to smell flowers and other vegetation, and then they were out. The river left the mouth of the underground cave. Hang on a second. I hate it when I do stupid things. Fat fingers. They left the mouth of the underground cave and then worked. They left the mouth. The river left. Okay. The river left the mouth of the underground cave and then worked its way down among the hills to a small lake off in the distance. It was still night. The moon overhead shined brightly. Were we down there all day? Asked Chad. It would seem so, replied Bart. No wonder I'm so tired, yawned Riyan. But now is not the time to rest, Bart told the others. We still need to get out of goblin territory. Are we finished in Algoth then? Asked Chad. We found what we came for, replied Bart. Now it's time to go. They couldn't help but to turn their gaze southeastward toward the mountains that marked the boundary between goblin lands and that of humans. Hidden in the night, their mighty peaks were but a pale, shadowy whisper against a backdrop of stars. Riyan finally broke the quiet by saying, It's not getting any closer with us just standing here. With that, they headed out. Lights could be seen on the far side of the small lake where the underground river finally ended, indicating another of the goblin villages. Riyan, Chad, and Kevik moved off through the hills when Bart suddenly stopped and grew thoughtful. Riyan was quick to notice his friend not following and came to a stop as well. "What is it?" he asked. Chad and Kevik came to a stop and returned back to the other two. "I was thinking that if we were to take a boat from yonder village," he explained as he pointed off to the distant lights, "then we could reach the marketplace all the quicker." "Seems a bit risky to me," argued Chad. Bart turned to him and said, "So is hoofing it on foot across goblin-infested lands. They know we're here somewhere." Then he sniffed and added, from the smell of it, the fire is still burning, and it's between us and the mountains." The air did still smell of smoke. "They have ponies, too," Riyan said in support of Bart's suggestion. "On horses, we could outrun them, but not on foot." "And don't forget," chimed in Kevik, "even when the goblins were on foot, the only reason they didn't catch us was that we passed the totem and entered Algoth." Chad saw they were in support of Bart's plan. "Very well," he sighed. Bart nodded. "Okay, let's get down to the water's edge, and then Chad and Kevik, you two wait on the shore while Riyan and I go steal us a boat." "Me?" asked Riyan. He was nervous about entering a goblin village. Visions of his death rolled through his mind. "Yes, you," Bart said. "I need someone to watch my back, and you're the only one not weakened by recent injury." Riyan swallowed and nodded. "All right," he said. His voice revealed his nervousness. And that is chapter 27. So it's still exciting. I've had comments of people that I add too much to my books. And as a self-published author, I do. I admit that. I just let the story go where it will. I probably do stuff that I don't need to. Like the whole Bart returning to get the door. I could very well have easily just had the door already been there, a few sentences here, a few sentences there, and the door would have been with him and been fine. But instead, I had Bart go back and go through this whole thing with Kevik. Why? It just felt right. And so, people have their ideas of what a writer should and should not do. And that's okay. I have no problem with that. And it doesn't bother me anymore when people criticize my books and hey, if people want to give me advice, I have no problem with that. No problem with that at all. It doesn't bother me. If someone tells me I've got misspellings, if someone tells me this doesn't make sense, well, that stuff I do need to hear. And like I tell my kids, I'm going to give you advice. They're adults now. And I'll say, I'll give you advice. And then, as far as I'm concerned, that's all that ends my involvement. Whether you take it or you don't take it won't affect my emotions either way. However, I tell them I do reserve the right to say I told you so if you don't take my advice, and it doesn't work out for you. But other than that, advice, I give advice freely to everybody all the time, and it probably annoys people. But I'm not going to come back later and say, "Well, did you take it?" I don't really care. I've said what I've said, and that's all. And that's all that matters. Of course, there's some pieces of advice you just can't give people. Like when your girlfriend says she thinks she's gaining weight, you can't say, "Well, you should stop eating." Or give her a dieting advice. That's usually a bad idea. And I've learned to not do that. Yeah. Anyway, so we'll do chapter 28 tomorrow. And hopefully this will upload good today. Yesterday was just a nightmare with uploading. Storms, out in cow country, internet, or satellite internet. It can be a problem at times. Anyway, y'all take care, and I'm going to do my best to get this up to you.